Welcome back to the Festiva garage, guys. Today we're going to talk about the core support. What is it? Why do we do it? And how do we do it? From my understanding, I first learned about this modification from Charlie. I think somebody else may have done it before him. However, he is the one who brought it to my attention. So the core support is this material right here. Runs along the front of the car. Your engine cross member mounts to it here and here. The core support ties into your frame rails. That's all spot welded together. There and there. The stock material is very weak. As you can see, this one's had a little bit of damage done to it. It doesn't look all the best. It's starting to rot. And if we tap it with anything, you'll just hear how soft this material really is. Yeah, it sounds like a pop can. Pop can may be even stronger. So the general idea is to trim this material out and replace that material with something similar to angle iron. This angle iron here happens to be 2x2 by 1/4 inch. It is pretty stout. It's possibly a little overkill. However, it'll work and it'll stiffen the front end up very much. The reason why we do this is A, the stock material is very weak and it'll rot. The stock material also is held in place by 2 nutserts that are welded inside this frame. If those nutserts break loose and spin on you, you have to do some sort of modification, like cutting a hole in here, peeling this material back in order to access those nuts, in order to put a wrench or something on it to hold those nuts so you can lower that cross member. It's an extreme pain in the ass. So this modification allows us to get away from those nutserts and design the system however we want. Also, it'll allow us to reposition the radiator forward and down, allowing us to move the motor similar to this one here. This was a motor mount job that I did not do, however I have to work around it now. As you can see, the stock radiator mount has been trimmed off in order to allow this new mount to run closer to the frame. So we're going to have to move the radiator away from that mount. The only way to do that is to either trim this material down, which would sacrifice structural integrity, or create a new core support, which we will be doing. So stay tuned for that. This is just step one. I like to pull as much off of the car as possible, so that way I have the maximum amount of working space. I'll have to be welding a lot on this car, so having any and everything out of the way is my top priority. I hate working cramped. I like a lot of freedom. So first step is to remove everything and get plenty of working room. On this particular one, I will not be removing the engine. I'm going to do the core support with the engine in place. The basic steps of the core support would be to remove the material that is on here now, being careful not to cut too deep into this plate. This is the plate that's mounted straight to the frame rails. You want this plate intact. However, you want to remove this plate here. There are several spot welds that you have to either drill out or grind out. I typically just grind them out. I find it easier for me. It takes a little bit of time, takes a couple of cutting wheels on a die grinder, If you had a torch, that would be lovely, or if you had a plasma cutter, even better. However, my torch is down for the count, and I do not have plasma. So I'll take a grinder, and I'll just cut here. Then I'll cut along here, down the side, down the bottom. I'll peel this material back and out of the way. That'll expose this material here, so I can get my grinder in there with ease and cut these spot welds out. There are several. If you run your finger along here, you'll feel them. They're just little divots in the metal. Those spot welds have to be cut out on both left and right hand side. Before you do that, you need to support the motor and remove the 2 bolts out of the cross member. Once the cross member is down and on its own, you need to remove the bolt for the sway bar. It'll have 2 nuts on it here and here. This one looks like a nut and a bolt, same thing. So the sway bar brackets need to come loose on both sides, and the cross member needs to come loose. Once everything is loose and out of the way, you can start cutting and trimming however you want to remove this material. Once the material is removed, we'll get a good measurement from left to right hand side. That'll be our total width. We'll cut our angle iron to size, and then we will have to do some modifications to the angle iron to make it weld onto the car properly. This time we're going to plan ahead of time and try to make those brackets lie in the middle of our angle iron, or closer to the middle than before. So stay tuned for that. We have started taking apart the mounts, getting ready to cut on the core support. Just wanted to take the time to point out the nut here, the nutsert as they call it. You can see the welds on there. It may look as if somebody has added extra weld over the years. That does not look factory to me. Could be, or it might not be, I don't know. Either way, those are a pain in the ass. The second bolt here was unbelievably hard to get out. It was rusty, didn't want to come out. The bolt almost stripped. It was a pain in the ass to get out. Luckily, I'm not going to be reusing those. I will make new hardware, so it's not an issue. However, I wanted to point out one thing. Anytime you're doing a core support or any other big modification to a car like this, it's always best to know what you're getting into. I got to looking at this one finally, and at first I'd noticed that, hey, there's no sway bar. Well, that's kind of weird. And then I started looking at the lower control arm, and I noticed that it's not a traditional Festiva control arm. It is actually an A-arm. I don't know if you can see it if the video is picking it up, but this car has been modified to accept some other control arm, or A-arm, trailing arm, or whatever the hell they call it. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how well this one's done. It's bolted straight through the floor pan. It does look to have some metal welded in. However, let's take a look at these welds real quick. I know my camera's not picking it up, but those are some booger welds right there. The plate does look like it is welded in solid along the frame there and along the majority of the body. Getting out in this part of the body over here, we're dealing with a little bit of rust, so it's understandable that that weld isn't exactly pretty looking. I would like to see a little more space between here. However, that may be mounted proper. I don't know. I've never dealt with that particular modification, so that is all new to me. I do know that on Carlos's drag car, which I know was radically different, it has a version of a sway bar. His looks more like a track bar, or whatever you call it, I don't know. However, this car does appear to be quite a bit different from a stock Festiva. Typically, what I do when I do a core support is I use the sway bar as kind of a gauge to show me where my new bar is supposed to be mounted. With the sway bar mounted into this back bolt here, it kind of levels itself out between this one and the other one. However, with this car being so different, I think what I'll do is leave this bar, this plate mounted. I will not bust this back bolt loose. I'm even going to put a mark with an ink pen or a paint pen back here, so that way I know that this plate hasn't moved after grinding or after cutting the core support off. Typically I remove this plate completely so that way I have plenty of room to get back here and cut this core out. So this one is a little different, so I'm going to leave the plate and just trim around it. It'll take me a little extra time and a little extra effort, but I'll know that the body is still straight afterwards because I will not bust this plate loose. No, it's not going to be 100% perfect and absolutely dead on. However, it will be close. I've done it many times this way, where I even take this plate off and then put it back on and then just eyeball it, and it has done just fine. So that's the way we'll do this one. We'll leave that plate, we'll cut around here, and then we'll start cutting plate that'll weld back in place, and we'll pick the video up then. Here we go, guys, with the first couple of cuts that I've made for the core support. Again, there's many ways to get this material off, and if I told you I did it this way every single time, I'd be lying. I kinda just start cutting and just get the material off. That's all that matters. So do it whichever way you like. I don't even do it the same way every time, I just cut it. But on this particular one here, I made a cut up here, over, down. I had to cut the corner so that way I could peel the corner out and back. I made a cut along the bottom here that looks like it was completely pointless. My next cut will be to cut this corner out so that way the two pieces will be independent of each other. Once independent, then I can go along and cut the bottom out and get that piece off, and then I can work on grinding down this ledge here, get those spot welds done and gone. Once we get that done, we'll pick the video back up and show you the end of the frame wheel all cleaned up and ready for the new material to be welded in.